In this section, we are going to review some of the TSIC data for the Dietetics and Nutrition exam from the past few years. We're also going to explain the review process for the exam. So this chart shows the years since the TSIC has been in pilot. We have been in pilot for the Dietetics and Nutrition TSIC for the past 4 years. And you can see the data here as far as number of students who have tested and the pass rate. Don't let this pass rate discourage you. It is a very difficult exam, but as you can see, our numbers for the percent that have passed have increased throughout the years. So take note that in fall of 2019, we only have fall only data. There were some schools that were able to test in the spring, but we're only including the data from fall of that semester. So you can see that the very first year that the TSIC was offered in the spring of 2018, 37 students were tested and 1 passed. That student passed with a grade of 70, which is the cut score. And then we had an increase in the number of students who passed from 2018, fall of 2019, and then the fall and spring of the 2020-2021 school year. The important thing to note here is the number of students, this bottom row, the number of students who are scoring within 10 points of the cut score. So these numbers are extremely encouraging because that might be the difference between rigor of content or how you're approaching teaching the lessons. It may be just a minor shift in how you plan for or assess your students. And so these students that have scored within 10 points of the cut score, maybe with a small shift of rigor, they could have passed. So it's very encouraging to see that 15% of the students who tested this past fall and spring scored within 10 points of the cut score. So when you receive your data after your students have taken the TSIC, you're going to receive multiple levels of data. So you're going to see not only your individual student scores, but you're also going to see statewide data. So this chart right here shows how the students performed on the TSIC in various content areas. The blue is the 2017-18 school year. The red is the 18-19 school year, and then the green is the fall only. So you can see for the nutrition, for the lifespan, there was a significant increase in most of these scores as far as percentage of questions that were correct in those areas. And so this shows a lot of promise in how our students are doing in the TSIC. Here is the data for the Dietetics and Nutrition exam for the 2020-2021 school year. And you can see there are definitely areas that we need to maybe improve on as far as content goes. The macronutrient, micronutrient content area tends to be a little bit lower, as well as digestion. It's very encouraging that students are doing well in the safety and sanitation. So a lot of those content areas that are repeated throughout the entire program of study, students tend to do a little bit better. We're performing around 80% in those areas. So you can see the difference. The blue is the state average for fall of 2020, and the red is the state average for the spring of 2021. And then we have a breakdown of what that looks like. This is a little bit easier to read, but in the fall of 2020, 72% of the questions in the nutrition for the lifespan content area were answered correctly. So what the state does after all of the schools participating in the TSIC have taken the exam is they go back and review these numbers. So they look at specific questions, specific areas of content that on average the state did not score well on. So those questions go up for review. So what they do is they review the median average by content area, and they review questions with less than 25% correct response rate. So what we're looking here is, first of all, was it a good question? And second of all, how do we identify those knowledge gaps that are represented in those questions? So here's an example of a few of the questions that have been under review. So in the content area for nutrition for the lifespan, learning outcome number 8, we see that it says to describe the importance of fitness and exercise during each stage of the lifespan. So what they may look at here is, first of all, was that a good question? Why are students missing it? And sometimes they're missing it because there may be two similar answers and they choose the wrong one. Sometimes they miss it because it's just a bad question. In the event that it's a bad question, those questions are vetted and thrown out of the test bank. For this question specifically, they may deem it to be a good question. And then we've got to think about, well, what do students need to know in regards to the importance of fitness and exercise during each stage of the lifespan, and maybe cover that knowledge gap a little bit better. You can see that in the dietary guidelines content area, learning objective 3 lists and explain the summary of dietary guidelines for Americans on diet and optimum physical health as outlined by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So there's a lot of things to understand within the dietary guidelines. So how are we teaching that? Are we teaching just the guidelines? Are we teaching the importance of the guidelines, how to use the guidelines? Are we teaching how often those guidelines are written? So there's a lot of different knowledge pieces within this learning outcome that we need to make sure we're covering. You can see here macro and micronutrients, looking at the roles of vitamins in the human body, and then looking at vitamin and mineral deficiencies. There's a lot of vitamins. So it's very difficult to make sure that your students are retaining all of that knowledge and understanding how to apply that in day-to-day life. So for example, if I'm looking at deficiencies, it's not enough for me to know that vitamin C causes scurvy. What I need to know is, what are the symptoms of scurvy? So if I'm, presented with a client who has these symptoms, I need to be able as a student to recognize that, okay, well, that sounds like scurvy, and scurvy is a deficiency in vitamin C. And I'm going to get vitamin C from these food sources. So it's that application of the knowledge that is super important for these students. It's not enough just for them to know that a deficiency in vitamin C is scurvy, or to know what the signs and symptoms of scurvy are. So there's a lot of building knowledge here. Looking at nutritional assessment and behavioral change, perform a nutrition assessment on clients of varying ages, genders, activity levels, and dietary restrictions. This would be where a case study situation might be helpful for students to bridge that knowledge gap. And then professionalism and employment, apply communication skills and describe the importance in the nutrition field. We talk about communication in Intro to Human Studies. 3 years later, they're taking this test. So it's really important to make sure that in the intro course, we're teaching them those basic communication skills and then bringing them back in that dietetics class, the 3rd level class, where we can apply those communication skills like iMessages, active listening, open-ended questions, where we can apply those skills that we've taught them in human studies and put them in real world relevance, remembering those key points and the components of those key points, that real world application. Well, what does this look like in a dietetic setting? What does this look like in the nutrition field where I'm speaking to a client? It's that application knowledge that is important. So once you get an understanding of the content areas and how your students are going to perform on those content areas, you can consistently change your teaching, make adjustments, add more rigor to your class, and have a better outcome for your students.